Welcome to Textile Talks. I'm Martha Seelman. I'm the Executive Director of Studio Art Quilt Associates. We tend to go by our acronym SAQA or SAQA. We are one of four organizations: SAQA, Surface Design Association, the International Quilt Museum, and the Quilt Alliance, who jointly put on these textile talks every week and invite artists and other institutions to join us as our featured presenters. I'd like to start by inviting you to join SAQA's global creative community. We have about 4,300 artists from countries around the world, and it's a great community to be part of, to be inspired by, and to use as an incredible resource for any kind of question you have about making art. We also have an extensive resource library on our website that members have access to. And our big claim to fame is that we have a wide variety of different exhibitions traveling to museums and quilt shows all the time. At the moment, we have somewhere around 16, 17 exhibitions from all of our global members that are traveling, as well as another 15 to 20 that are regional exhibitions. So if you are looking for an opportunity to share your artwork, please do consider joining us as a member. Use the code TALKS, TALKS, to get $20 off your first year of membership at SAQA.com/join. We hope that you'll join us as we go on to create wonderful art and have fun together in the quilting arts movement. So today's presentation, we're sharing the work of three of our members, Salley Mavor, Barbara Schneider, and Jean Sredl, who all create three-dimensional elements or three-dimensional sculptures as their artwork. And we're going to hear from each of them about their art, and we invite you to ask questions as you watch the presentations. And you can post those questions either in the chat or in the Q&A box, which is along, if you're on a computer, is along the bottom of your screen. So first, Salley Mavor is going to talk to you about her long-term career creating wonderful sculptures out of fabric and found objects. And if you have small children or grandchildren, I encourage you to look for her books. They are wonderful. Nursery rhymes and other books for children illustrated with Salley's sculptures. But Salley also does really interesting political commentary using some of the same techniques. And she's going to share more about her art with you now. Go ahead, Salley.
All right. Thank you for that lovely introduction, Martha. Let's see if I can get this up and going. Can everyone see it?
Perfect.
Okay, wonderful. Oh, it's wonderful to be here. Thank you for listening. Today I'm going to talk about my life's work, really. So how it's evolved, where it comes from, and why I do it. Put simply, a needle is my tool, thread is my medium, and stitches are my marks. I sew on flat surfaces and three-dimensional objects. I create lush, detailed miniature worlds out of a variety of fabrics and materials. And I use hand stitching techniques that I've developed over 50 years. My work has a storytelling element to it. And my aim is to breathe life and emotion into embroidery, an art form which is quite often thought of as just decorative. It ranges from precious to poignant to provocative. During my career, I've illustrated many children's books. The original illustrations have two lives. They are photographed and printed in the books, and then the work is framed and exhibited. In addition to illustrating children's books, I've written a how-to book, Felt We Folk, which teaches how to make these little dolls. And my husband, Rob Goldsboro, and I have made stop-motion animations. So where did this doll-infested needle and thread universe come from? Well, it started at the height of the baby boom in a family of introverts who were either making things or staring into space. And not that much has changed. This is my first book, made at age 8. I really like to draw, but I felt that my pictures weren't finished until something real was added, either stapled or glued to the paper. Doll play was an important part of my childhood, and except for a few self-conscious teenage years, I've managed to set my life up so that I can still play with them. Later in art school, I rediscovered my love of making dolls and setting up scenes for them. And this may not have happened, but for a very perceptive illustration teacher, Judy Sue Goodwin Sturgis. She picked up on my interest in sewing because I would always have a handwork project going while I was sitting through the long and boring critique sessions. Here is Judy Sue in the center on a recent trip to my studio, and a doll I made of her as a gift. All those years ago, she encouraged me to solve the class assignments in 3 dimensions. So I stopped trying to fit into traditional notions of illustration and just started to play. I felt as if I was being set free to become the kind of artist I was meant to be. By the time I graduated, I had a business making stuffed pins. I made them by the hundreds, sitting at my table with a Singer featherweight. I also made soft sculpture kitchen appliances like this 9-inch tall refrigerator and a series of housewife dolls. I was really intrigued with 17th century English stump work, which is a form of raised embroidery. I took the stump work concept and made my own version, which I called fabric relief. After working with this new relief method for about 10 years, I was ready to illustrate my first book, The Way Home. I worked on the illustrations in the evening after my children were in bed. It took about a year and a half. I went on to illustrate classics like Mary Had a Little Lamb and newer stories like In the Heart. Then the fairies invaded and they stayed for about 10 years. That's when I realized that I better stop making them or I'd never leave their world. I started making larger, standalone pieces like Birds of B.B. Woods, which features a dozen life-size birds from my area of New England. And I went from making a collection of birds to making a series of collective portraits of people. For some time, I thought that these little people I made could say so much more. This piece, Cover Up, includes women from all over the world wearing some form of head covering or mask or makeup or marking that distinguishes them in some way from the culture they come from, the religion, the place and time in history, fashion, social class, etc. I took these portraits and photographs of them and enlarged them, and I've been including them in some of my exhibits. And they are now known as the Wall of Women. So this is what my studio looks like for months at a time when I was working on a piece called Displaced. So Displaced was inspired by current world events, but it could very well represent the timeless plight of refugees throughout history. The 2016 presidential election sparked a new direction for my artwork. Any fairies that were left scattered or went into hiding. Rob and I had wanted to do a stop motion animation for years, and now we had a story. We made a satirical takeoff about the election based on the traditional tale of Hansel and Gretel. We worked in the basement for a year. Making it took us, well, it did take us a year to make a 13-minute movie. I made the sets and the scenery and the dolls and did the animation. And Rob oversaw the lighting and the video recording and the editing. Liberty and Justice, a cautionary tale in the land of the free, can be seen on my website and YouTube. After the movie came out, I resumed work on a book project that I had put on hold. My Bed, which is written by Rebecca Bond, is about children from around the world and the places they sleep. To begin the project, I researched tons of photos of children and living environments around the world. When I painted their faces and stitched their hair, I fell in love with them. Now it didn't matter how long it took to make the places these children call home. Each scene started with a sketch, which I blew up to full size. And then I used that as a guide to build up the artwork for each page. After the book was published in 2020, the artwork has been traveling around the country in a touring exhibition. It's an ongoing show, and there's another couple of years booked. During the pandemic, I started work on a project I've been wanting to do for years. It was something that I found very healing, a 4 seasons series. This is the fall scene, harvest time. The idea was to celebrate the wonder and magic of the natural world. I started with very small sketches, thumbnails really, and blew them up. And then over a period of months, worked on the finished artwork, which changed and evolved as I went. This is the spring scene. For the summer scene, I was inspired by what I saw outside, including the raspberries growing in the garden and Baltimore Orioles visiting our yard. I finished the 4-season series just in time to include them in last year's exhibition at the Southern Vermont Arts Center. My next exhibition will be starting this summer at the Albany Institute of Art and History. Well, after 50 years of single-minded dedication to making art, I feel a change taking place. Instead of wanting to stitch every single minute, I'm finding that I'm really enjoying spending time with my grandchildren and weeding the garden. And I don't know what is going to happen next, but I intend to keep living an artistic life and share my vision with the world. Thank you for listening to my story.
Thank you, Sally. That was fascinating, and I have a list of questions that we'll be getting into towards the end of today's presentation about materials and other logistics about your work. Right now, though, we're going to hear from Barbara Schneider, who also is creating in fabric and also is creating things that are three-dimensional. And her work has been garnering awards at just about every event having art quilts in it that you can think of. She's been really inspired by the nature around her, and her work has become sculptural as a way to better express her appreciation for the beauty of the forests in which she works in it and is a citizen conservator. So Barbara, if you can turn on your video, we'd love to hear about your art. All right, so you're going to share your screen now?
That was my plan. Now let's
All
see.
right.
Where has it gone? Here we go. Well, thank you for having me be part of this. I want to talk a bit about what I am doing, which I titled Walking in Wonder. And it's about observation, creativity, and my fascination with nature. And I know this is a long quote, but it's a really important one to me. The gift the artist offers to share with us is the mindful act of seeing. For in order to make material from their thoughts and ideas, they have to spend time noticing, looking intently, and making careful observation. This act of seeing slows us down and invites us to pay attention to the moment, to be still and not to rush and only take a quick glance, but instead to come into relationship with the world around it. This is from Leslie Sutton, and I find it to be a guide for my thinking about my work all the time. So today I'm going to talk a bit how I've merged my two, I don't know what word I want here, my two passions, I guess, conservation and textile art. And as I talk about that, I'll be showing different examples. This, for example, is called Line Dance, and there's a whole series in this series. There's a whole series that's about things that I find as I walk in the forest. And I often am taking pictures of tree stumps and then bringing those images back and working with them on my computer to blow them up and then to stitch them heavily enough that they start to create the the sense of you actually looking into the texture of that tree stump again. But what started it all was this leaf. I picked this up one day on a walk. I was so fascinated by the patterns in it that I wanted to figure out what could I do with this. And I continue to pick up things like this. But this was the first dimensional piece that I created, and the leaves are about 34 inches tall, each of them a little bit more, a little bit less. And I made all of these leaves, and then they just sort of sat here because that was all they were. They were just these flat pieces. And then one day it occurred to me that if I shaped them, I could use light and shadow to start to bring them to life. And that was a real revelation. Here are some details from that, of the stitching and of just one or two leaves. That led to trying to recreate these very teeny tiny leaves. They're about 2 inches tall each. And that became a piece called Leaf Fragments Variation 1. And there are about, I think, 20 some leaves in it, each one individually printed on my home computer, which did not love doing that. And then I would sit at night after stitching them and cut out all the holes with little nail scissors. So along the way, I learned that that is not an ideal way to work. It makes a huge mess and it's really hard on your hands. So little by little, I started changing methods. But they all came back down to this idea of light and shadow interacting with the shapes themselves. This one is called Linden Leaf Rag, and the detail is in the corner. And this piece I created for Quilt National some years ago now, called Golden Leaves, and it's 6 feet by 6 feet. And when it started out, I knew I wanted it to be big. And that seemed like a good size. And I made each of these leaves, again, printed on the home computer. And I thought, surely I'm going to fill this up. And each time I made a few more leaves, I thought, surely this is going to fill it up. But it took far more. It took over 100 leaves to actually fill up that space. And this is a detail from that. And then toward the end of my leaf obsession is Red Oak Tangle, which was sort of the same way as the golden leaves in that it took far more leaves to create the circle than I thought it would. That led to a series called Forest Floor. By this time I had discovered Phosphates, which is a thermoplastic material that looks a lot like a quilt batting. But what it does is it will shrink when heat is applied to it with a heat gun or a hair dryer, things like that. So I learned that I could recreate some of these beautiful logs that I've seen in the forest by making small little pieces of the Foss shape and created the ridges and the patterns in it first and then assembling them. This is another example called Nurse Log, in which it's now been fully turned into a tube and then open at each end. Another example, Moss Log. I learned how I could create the moss with free motion stitching on dissolvable fabrics and then using heat and stitching, add that moss to the log itself. And what I like about creating these logs is that sense of being able to look into them, to see a whole nother world that if you're walking in the forest, you're likely to just never pay any attention to. And this is Forest Floor, which was at Visions 2 years ago now, I believe. And I really loved creating this piece in particular with all the different levels of textures, the different kinds of lichens and mosses and holes and fragments all together. This is the split log, pretty much all the same methods. And this piece, which was recently in Quilt National and is still traveling with the show. Birch bark, a different kind of texturing, and that was lovely to work on. And then this piece has started me in a somewhat newer direction. It was recently at Art Quilt Elements, and it's the tree stumps and the shaping. So things are coming together. This is a little bit about the process. I create these little fragments on the Foss shape and do the stitching and add the some of the texturizing in the background, which I use an embellisher to basically break up the thread. I end up with bits and pieces like this. Each of these are probably a foot to 18 inches. I build an armature out of wire, which will not be in the final piece. It just gives me something to shape it over. And then bit by bit, it comes together. And any kind of tool that's laying around gets pressed into service. So moving on to my other passion, which is conservation, I am currently a site steward for Alden Gap, which is this beautiful area in McHenry County that we're in the process of restoring. And in this particular spot, a glacier sat and created where it basically created what they call the gap, which is a sunken area, and then the hills around it. And it's a beautiful piece of land. And I have been working for 5 years with a group of volunteers to basically rework that piece of land and go back to the way it was prior to settlement. And as it says here, the big woods of McHenry County was once extended for miles, and only a tiny bit of that now survives. And we're trying to, on this 100-acre parcel, to go back in and rebuild some of that for the future. So on that whole site inspires me. And on these maps show you that back in 1837 on the left, all of what you see there in gold was oak trees. And on the right in 2005, that is what's left. So I'm out there with my volunteers and we are replanting those trees every fall that are grown by the conservation district. And then we go out and get them in the ground and hope that they will survive. But it's also led me to an art project, which is to try and represent what that site and this Alden Gap area mean. So I started doing research and found the old topographical maps as well as the township maps from many years, 1872 here, 1892, 1916 onward, as well as maps that indicated where all of the what they call witness trees exist, which are the oaks that were used in surveying the land. How the land is, the geological parts of it, the kinds of trees and oak trees that grow there. And from that, and collecting a lot of the oak leaves from the site, I've created a piece that's still unnamed, but it made use of folding and stitching those township maps on vellum, making them into little pockets, and in each of the pockets, there's a white leaf that's representing the missing trees. And then every now and then there'll be a little oak sprout, which is trying to represent what we're trying to recreate there. So that's a project that's ongoing. I have other ideas about how to proceed with that. This one, I'm not so sure is there yet. So it hasn't been out of the studio. And on that note, I will hope to see you in the woods, or hope that you will go enjoy the woods. Thank you for the opportunity to speak.
Thank you, Barbara. I hope that all your seedlings thrive in their new homes.
I do too. That'd be wonderful. It won't happen, but it sounds great. Thank you.
All right, and now our third artist is Jean Sredl, and she also is creating three-dimensional art, but in her case, she's being inspired by materials that she is finding and saving from the landfill. So, Jean, I'm really looking forward to seeing your art and hearing about your process.
Thank you. Thank you for having me. I appreciate Barbara's and Sally's excitement with their artwork. I've been an artist for about 12 years now, and my focus is on texture and abstraction. This piece is my largest piece, and it is all wool and spun and painted and all kinds of stuff in there. It is almost 9 feet square, and it sticks out from the surface about 8 inches. I felt these big, heavy, thick ropes about 4 to 5 inches wide, and I shaped them. And my 3D work is not freestanding. It hangs from the wall, and it extends out from the wall. So it's a little different. This piece is called After the Warming. After global warming, the trees are burnt, the world is covered in particulate pollution, and it causes a nuclear winter, so to speak. This big tree is stuffed with trapunto type technique in the back. It sticks out about 3 inches from the quilt, and it is all hand embroidered and a lot of stitching, machine stitching in the background. This is diminutive. It's currently in microscape. The fun part about this quilt was each square is 2 inches, and they're all different. Each one is either felted or painted or fused or whatever, but the really fun part was the triple French knots. They're one on top of each other with big heavy yarn. They stick out from the quilt about 1 inch. This is my funny Valentine. It's hand spun yarn of silk and wool, felted material, hand embroidered, and the red band in the middle of the heart is yarn that was sewn into the quilt, unraveled and frayed with a brush. So there's a lot of different ideas here. This is the cosmic microwave background, or another name for the Big Bang. I made this fabric out of silk waste. I used a soluble fabric and free motioned it together so it didn't get thrown away. This is Coral Sea. It is 6 feet tall by about 4.5 feet wide. And this was really a turning point, because I started making these big units that I would sew together by hand. And it is the bottom of the ocean as you're looking down into it. And here's the opposite, another in the After the Warming series, where the coral is all bleached and killed by the high temperature of the oceans. And it was quite the opposite. Here is a visual representation of a bipolar disorder. It's all about opposites. It's very textural. It sticks out 3 inches from the surface with the ruffled silk and the curlicue yarn that is stiffened using Aleene's fabric stiffener in various concentrations. And this piece, all the little pieces are made with various materials, but they're held together with metallic thread. This is Wind Song. Again, it's little squares all sewn together, each one different. The squares are 1 inch across and they're cross-stitched in. And the beading technique I call bead salad. Some of the beads are stick quite far out from the quilt because they're on the end of long bugle beads, so they can be 1 inch high. And this is Gala. It's in, I believe, gastronomy. Now it looks flat in the picture, but the apple is another trapunto stuffed feature. It's about, the apple itself is about maybe 3 feet, but it's 3 inches high, and you just want to squish into it. It's really thick. I really had fun with this piece. I thought I'd share with you some of my unusual materials because that's where a lot of my ideas come from. In the top left is a 1937 wedding dress given to me by a friend. It's got the lace overdress, the silk dress, and the silk taffeta underdress. And just a lot to work with. It all dyes beautiful, and it's not synthetic because they didn't have it back then. Top right is silk waist from the Throster's waist machine where they spin the silk, and it's thrown away, but I dye it different colors, or I paint it, or I stiffen it. It's very flexible. Bottom right is a box full of wool country western men's string ties from the 1970s. I bought this box at a garage sale. I unravel the ties and I use the wool as thread or couching because it's so old, the crimp in the wool is permanent. And bottom right is latex wool. It's locks of wool that are in interesting shapes that I dip in latex, and then I either paint or I leave as is. I wanted to say one other thing about the latex wool. In the piece Coral Sea, I painted it metallic purple and then coated it with glass bead gel. Now this piece is called Stormy Sea. It was in Quilt National last year along with Barbara's piece. And it's a whole cloth quilt. Now, not all my work is 3D. This one is about 3/8 of an inch thick to 1/2 an inch thick. And it's a whole cloth quilt that I dyed. I drip dyed by hanging it over a pole. And it is, I start with darker colors on one end and lighter colors on the other end, and they blend together and they form all different kinds of shades, and they can break together. I use, excuse me, I use 12 weight Aurifil thread and 110 needle, and I use heavy felt as a backing, and I stitch along the colors. I call this kind of quilting Van Gogh quilting because it's all curvy and wavy, and it can be a little bit abrupt like his brush strokes. The stitching is about 1/8 of an inch to 1/4 of an inch apart, and they're 3/8 of an inch long. And it's not thread painting, it's not thread sketching, it's Van Gogh quilting. Here's another view. And of course, with every quilt, there's always a challenge. And this one, with every color change, there were tie-offs. So here's the close-up of the tie-offs. And I had to square it up, so I used my level and a hammer, but it worked. I made a window in the back so the jurors could see both sides of my stitching. And here's the whole piece, 96 inches across. Again, the trick was to get them hang so that the colors matched. This next piece is called a time and stitch, and it just got accepted into abstraction textural elements. It's going to be shown in Germany at the Palatinate Museum in Heidelberg in September 15th. So we're very excited. The focus is the grid-like structure of the hand-spun wool that's couched onto the quilt. The wool is very easy to make. Lucy's going to drop a link to a video in the chat that'll show you how to do it. You don't need an expensive spinning wheel or anything like that. It's a lot of fun to try. Here is a side view. This yarn in the middle here, it's about 3 inches in diameter. So it's a very textural piece. You feel like you could just cuddle with it. Here's the work in process. Again, getting the yarn exactly horizontal and exactly vertical. I had to get my level out again. Here's an extreme close-up showing the actual stitching. I like to do hand stitching, and this is yarn, that's silk yarn I dyed myself, and it's about 1/8 of an inch thick. And it is very long stitches. You know, these stitches are between 4 and 8 inches long, but the trick is to sew them into each other so they don't fall off. So here's the entire piece. And I appreciate you watching my segment. Thank you.
Thanks, Jean. That was fascinating. I never realized that there were so many different textural elements that could be put together from silk and wool waste. And in fact, that was one of the questions from the audience was, where are you sourcing your silk waste?
I do get, I have several suppliers on Etsy, and I talk to them about buying in quantity when I find something that really works, and or they can make something up in a certain way that I like. And you just have to talk to people, and sometimes you just find it laying in your neighbor's garbage. Or my neighbor had a sweater from her ex-husband she wanted to get rid of. Well, we took care of that.
Ah, well, good. And
Put it in the
Sally,
washing machine.
Sally, there was also a question about where are you finding all of the wonderful materials that you use in your art?
Well, I've collected things. You can see them. I'm in my studio. You can see everything behind me. I have so much stuff. I never need to buy anything or find anything ever again. But it's a lot of natural things. I use wool felt. I don't make felt. I'm more of a person who likes to use materials. I don't need to start with the sheep and then get to where I am.
Mhm.
I'd rather spend my time stitching and making things. I had a great source for plant dyed felt, but that business went defunct. So there are a few out there. I have on my website, I have a frequently asked questions page, and it has information there.
Wonderful.
And I use so little thread that I hardly ever need to buy anything. And I still use needles that I inherited from my great aunt that were in her dresser drawer. You know, I'll never need to buy another needle.
Mhm. And the doll heads are wooden, correct?
Doll heads are wooden. I used to use all different kinds of fabric. But now I do the wood.
Mhm.
And painting.
Yeah. And Barbara, there is a question about your foss-shaped pieces. How are you adding color to those pieces?
I do a certain amount of painting, part of it's stitching, some of it's burning, whatever it takes, basically, is what I do.
Yeah, yeah, and they're incredible. And I thought it was fascinating that you've now gone full circle back
Yes.
to the stumps and are using the foss shape with the stump imagery. That really is fun to see that happen.
Actually, the last one, the red blue shaped stump, was not using foss shape at all. That one I ended up
Okay,
using wire. So
right.
sort of just another little offshoot. But I am working on some right now that might have both. I don't know.
Mm-hmm. And I know, Sally, you use a lot of wire for stiffening
Yes,
in
and
your pieces.
I've finally, after years of using just cheap wire and finding that it rusts over time, so the archival quality was not good, that
Mhm.
I get jewelry wire now, and I use that, and it doesn't tarnish or rust.
Mhm. And then, Jean, you said that your primary stiffeners are Aleene's fabric stiffener and latex paint. Is that correct?
I use a variety of things. Sometimes I even use wooden dolls or plastic canvas, or like Sally said, some wire. And I've recently started with some of this foss shape too,
Mhm.
but I have to get used to it. But yeah, I use a lot of Aleen stuff because you can dilute it and make it to the strength you need.
Mhm. We're talking before we started the presentations about a question that came in through the Textile Talks website, which is about, so you've created these wonderful artworks, how do you ship them? And so if you could each answer what kinds of challenges you found in shipping, that would be great. Sally, why don't we start with you?
Okay, since most of my work is small, like the children's book illustrations, I can box it up and ship it. And at this point of my career, I am having shows where the venue pays for the shipping. And
Yes.
so even though it's gone up, that does cut down on the places that are able to do it. Also, museums will arrange to have a van come and pick things up. It's the insurance is a real hard thing to deal with. A lot of times I just hope that everything will, don't do insurance because it's just too expensive, and I could never get I mean, you can never make it again. I mean, it's lost. When it's lost, it's lost. So my stuff actually isn't that hard to ship.
Okay, and Barbara?
It depends on the piece. For example, again, that last piece ended up, I could actually roll it loosely and send a diagram about when you open it up, then squish it a little over here or over here and make it come together. And in the end, on that piece, you know, it would look good as long as it had ripples in it. And if they weren't exactly the way they were to begin with, it didn't matter. The log pieces aren't too bad because they will fit in a box just like a quilt does rolled up. The leaf pieces were harder. because they're just more fragile, and I end up pinning those in sections to foam core boards and then trying to stack them with support in boxes that make sense. The good news with all of this is that they may be awkward, but they're not heavy. So it kind of offsets how horrendous the shipping could be.
Sure. And Jean, you said yours squish, but then
Yes,
you have to unsquish them.
the first piece I showed that was the big one that's 8 by 9 feet. I just kind of squished it into a box, and you take it out and you fluff it up, you know, like a quilt, like a bed, you know, you're throwing out bed quilt on, and it looks fine. You want to, I again, like Barbara, you have very specific directions, and you construct the piece so it either can be disassembled and assembled and put in smaller pieces, but you have to start with the shipping in mind.
Right. Yeah, I think that's the advice that has really come out over the years of discussing this is start by thinking about shipping before you start the creative process, because that's going to limit where you can show a piece. And that certainly was my personal experience, was created a great piece, but I could only show it where I could drive to. If I couldn't drive it, I was never going to be worth shipping. I'm afraid we're run out of time for additional questions. We will be sending you the comments in the chat. People have really enjoyed your presentations. Thank you so much for being here and sharing your art. Everybody in the audience, please join us next week. We will be having another wonderful presentation, this time hosted by Surface Design Association. And it's going to be same time, same place. Go ahead and register right now so you don't forget. And please do consider joining SAQA and tell all your friends about Textile Talks. We want to share these wonderful resources, these wonderful lectures with as many people as we can. We now have, I think we're up to 199 or 200 recorded Textile Talks, all on YouTube, all free. We just want to share them. So please tell everybody you know that this is a great resource and they should go check it out, and they should definitely look for today's presentation because it's been wonderful. Thank you all so much for
My
your
pleasure.
presentation.
Thank you.